Command Point is sponsored by Crossfire Games. Use code CommandPoint25 at checkout to get 5% off your next purchase. Link in the description.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Command Point, and welcome to the 9th day of Kill Team. And I am joined today by a recurring, I think, 3-time guest at this point, Ryan Wilfong. Ryan, how's it going?
Hey, how's it going? I'm happy to be here for the third round of Christmas.
Yeah, and you're not talking about a melee chaos team today. What are we talking about?
Oh man, we're talking about the Bird Boys. Everyone loves them. It's the Kroot.
Yeah, Crude. It's a team I've given a lot of crap to over the years, but has always held a kind of like a warm spot in my heart. I do love Crude. I just want them to be good. And you took them to the World Championships, and you've been playing the crap out of them.
I sure did.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm very excited to kind of get into the weeds a little bit with you on Crude. So, I guess to start us off, for somebody that is getting into Kill Team, or maybe they're already into Kill Team and they're picking a new team, why do you think somebody should play Crew? Like, what is it about the playstyle, or even like just the aesthetic to you that would spur you enough to recommend this team to somebody?
So there's a few things that make Kroot incredibly unique, I think, on the table. They're a horde team, but they can all kind of punch a little bit above their weight, for being like basically a guardsman equivalent. They have very unique rules, like Pistolier who can shoot you first, or Bird Guy who can reveal some people on the other side of the board, or it's just like a gun that's called a Skinner, and it just quite frankly just rips apart anything it looks at. If AP2 in 5 shots hitting on 2s, like it's a menace. It's a weird team, and they're a little bit cumbersome, but I think that's what makes them so appealing, is because when all the things kind of come together, it makes a very cool looking team on the table. Not to mention the models of themselves, the actual sculpts of the official crew are really cool. Most people I talk to who play crew really have a ton of fun painting their team and coming up with like unique paint schemes, because the models themselves lend kind of to like a very dynamic um, combination of colors. For them being birds, they can kind of be whatever you want them to look like. So I think those are some of the reasons that people would like to play Kroot, or if you were interested in pursuing them, those should be the things that push you maybe over the edge.
Yeah, I totally agree on the sculpts. I think that Kroot are, for me personally, up there with Felgor as some of my favorite Kill Team specific sculpts that have come out. I just think they look so nice.
Yeah, they're good. They're very weird. They're not a bunch of guardsmen. They're not a bunch of chaos spiky boys. They're not orcs. They're just their own little niche thing of bird people with poached weapons, and they're just trying to kill you, and you don't know why.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's wonderful. So I guess you've got quite a few games in with the new Kroot now. What is something that to you, like something that clicked for you after a few games, maybe that maybe when it did click, it was kind of like a light bulb moment where it was like, oh my god, I wish I was thinking about this earlier. I wish this would have just made it so much easier to play this team from day one. Like, what is that little piece of level up advice that might help a newer player kind of find their footing with Farstalker Kinband?
So something I like to look at Kroot at is their play style, and a lot of times I like to say it plays like a bank robbery, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes when you're lining everything up right, it's going to look like the coolest thing around. You're flipping all your orders correctly. You're using poach, to counter anything your opponent was going to do, and everything works flawlessly, and everyone's amazed. And then the other time, you look at the bank robber who like showed up drunk to a Wendy's and got stuck, in between the fryer and the cash register. That's kind of how the team looks. And then if you don't use all of your tools right together, the team doesn't work. But if you do, it will be really good. And one of those things that ties it all together is their main faction ability called Farstalk, which allows you to, during your strategy phase, flip up to 3 orders on your team. It doesn't really seem that big of a deal until you look at some of the Kroot's unique abilities. For instance, they have dogs, and those dogs have a bodyguard ability, um, which allows basically if somebody charges one of your crew within 3 inches of the dog can charge them, which is great. But the dog can't do it on conceal. So what you can end up doing usually is setting that play up turn one with the dogs on conceal so they're safe, and then turn two, you can flip the dogs to engage now that they're somewhere safe and they can't be shot, and your opponent may not realize why they're doing that. And then
Hmm.
when you charge in, then the dogs can countercharge. So it's a play a lot of people don't see coming, or people who play Creep don't even realize you can do.
Yeah.
Similarly with Farstalk, what you can do on boards like Into the Dark is you can go on guard turn one pretty recklessly. Like you can have a lot of guys on guard turn one because you can end up just flipping them back to conceal turn two when your opponent maybe thinks they have a shot on you if they're going to take initiative because you're no longer on guard. So it's things like that where it's really utilizing the mind games of like flipping orders here and there to get the most out of your actual abilities for the group.
That is very smart about the. I had thought about the dog thing, but the guard thing, that is very interesting to me. I like that a lot. And it's kind of funny
Because
because
usually you can just
yeah, I was going to say
yeah,
this. Some of this stuff was technically possible last edition. It's just that Farstalk cost CP back then, so it was maybe a little bit less. Was it just less worth spending the command points on, or now that it's free, it's easier to set up?
so it was way worse to spend on because you desperately last edition needed your CP
Hmm.
A to do get an actual attack up that matters. You'd usually spend one right at the gate, and then you'd try to spend it on poaches as much as you could because loot was such a big thing.
Mm-hmm.
Now with it just being a free ability, you kind of have like, well, I might as well use it, right? There's no question of should you. It's a question of what will you use it on.
Nice.
And it's something if you're not using that, the team doesn't work well. You can't just ignore it.
Really cool. So, on the topic of so pivoting to the next question, for loadouts like operative selection, it's my understanding the crew have some interesting choices to make in regards to like the dogs and the warriors. So, or maybe even the specialist choices and like as far as what weapons you take. So, walk us through a little bit of how you make those choices in the pregame.
So usually I take all specialists. I think they're all unique enough and they play generically enough that they can fight any. There's no specialist where you're like, oh, I'm playing against commandos. Well, I'm not taking this guy. They all have a use no matter what the team you're playing against. Usually, what it comes down to is your choice of warriors or dogs. And you're gonna take warriors a lot more if you know you're in a mission that has a lot of action economy needed, or you need guys who can push buttons, or you need your secondary to be able to push buttons. Um, but if the mission kind of calls for something to be picked up, like if you're playing extraction, or I think
Like
it's
intel.
not coordinates, intel, yeah. If you're playing one of those two, you can bring dogs because they have the ability to do the pickup action while they're moving.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that you can kind of hit some points and then have the dogs run out with their extra movement and steal a point. Or if you're playing against a really melee heavy team, but not one that can fight twice, you can take dogs because a lot of times if they have a big guy who's going to charge in and fight, you send the dog in with that bodyguard ability I was talking about, and then you can fall back with the crew that your opponent originally targeted. You can use slip away to fall back for free, and then shoot the target who just charged you. So there's a few different options. The Warriors are obviously better now for crew because before they were just basic. Now they have an ability to use one of your faction equipment for free each turn, and you don't actually have to have that equipment to use it. So that makes it really nice to take warriors now over, if you did want to drop a specialist for like a lethal 5 or stun or a piercing shot, those options are there. But usually you want all the specialists. Like maybe the cut skin stays home in very rare cases, but that's about it.
Cool. Okay. One thing I wanted to ask you in particular with Crew was tac ops. So, I mean, last edition they had this crazy tac op thing where they would just max everything by turn 2 with this weird like cheese strategy. But what do you do nowadays with Crude? I mean, they have access to recon and infiltration. So, are you planting beacons like everybody else I've talked to, or is there another strategy here?
See, that one's a little hard because they're kind of good at all of the ones they have access to. I usually flip between what's it called the infiltration tac ops, which are the implants or
A surveillance, right? Gather.
yes, gather surveillance. Yeah, I just kept thinking implant. Yeah, I usually flip between those two because I like gather surveillance versus a marine team because you can usually just run one of your idiots up far on the edges of the board, and it's just that guy for the rest of the game who's just targeting one of the marines who's never going to die because crew kind of have a hard time killing some models outright.
Hmm.
So you kind of beat that by you use that guy as your point generator for the rest of the game. And as long as you can see that target with one of your crew who shot up the board, probably traversing things for two less, you can usually get those points guaranteed. Like I did that a lot in my games at Worlds. It worked really well versus Warp Coven and Legionaries,
Nice.
which are right now problem teams.
Yeah.
I do like confirm kill as well, though, partly because this team can kind of get up your face when you need to and just melee kill somebody and then take the point, usually afterwards. Or against Marines, you just need to pick up three bodies, then you score that max
Yeah.
out. But pretty much all of them have play with this team. Like the crew can play any of the tac ops available to them. And I think that's one of the good things you can flex around with is your opponent doesn't know what you're going to take.
Hmm. Yeah, and they might be one of the few teams that can actually play all of the tac ops available to them decently well, at least. Like most teams, maybe there's like one or two they don't take, but most teams will
Yeah,
just
I mean, you
like
can even
see plant beacons and just like go for it and just forget about everything else.
yeah, plant beacons can be a little tricky because the team doesn't have a bunch of like free mission actions or anything like that, or like ploys to do extra mission actions. And you usually want all of your actions to be like pumping into models to kill them
Mhm.
because you want to use as much damage as you can as often as you can, and then flip
Yeah.
back to conceal and stuff like that. So plant beacons is one I'm not too favored. Like it's not my favorite, but you can play it. There's nothing wrong with it.
Right. So I wanted to ask you now. I mean, you mentioned earlier. I was going to ask you about your early game strategy, like what you like to set up in turn one and like early turn two. You talked earlier about the dogs, setting up the dogs with Farstalk to, deny the charges, not deny, but to interrupt the charges a little bit, and like going on guard on ITD and using Farstalk. But other than that stuff, what are you trying to set up typically in the early game? Like, how are you staging your models?
So turn one, you would be surprised by how often you can get a sniper shot off with crew. Doesn't matter what board it is. Whether you're playing on Into the Dark or you're playing on Volcus, you can usually get a sniper shot because a lot of people forget one of two things. They either forget that the sniper can ignore obscuring, or that the tracker, who is the bird guy, can ignore light terrain by placing a token anywhere he can see. So what I'll usually do is I'll have the sniper in the most advantageous spot where he has the most vision on the map possible,
Mm-hmm.
and clearly like he can see certain spaces of light terrain or an exposed vantage point where people would normally think they're safe. Because then the bird guy, if he can see the same point as the sniper, the bird guy can turn off that cover, and then the sniper takes a shot. I think I did like six turn one sniper shots at Worlds, which was pretty crazy.
Wow.
Um, you'd be surprised at the angles you can cover when you can ignore obscurity and light terrain.
Yeah.
So I usually try to make sure I have those angles figured out on the board. Other than that, there's not too much early game you can really do. Like you can't do any alpha strikes unless your opponent positions very poorly, which did happen at Worlds. One of my opponents just positioned one guy just far enough in his deployment zone that he didn't see my bow hunter could use the trophy, which generates a third action point
Mm-hmm.
during his activation. He didn't see that my bow hunter could move dash and take a blast shot into his deployment zone. And I did that because you can utilize bounds, which reduces movement or climbing cost by 2 inches. So he just shot straight out and took I think, a 5-man blast turn one versus
Oh, man.
Blooded. And
Wow.
that sealed our game pretty much immediately. But
Yeah, I can
so you
imagine.
can occasionally do. you do have some shots available to you like that, and then next turn you can flip back to conceal and be safe again.
Yeah.
Those are the things I look for when I'm starting early on. Beyond that, it's a little tricky because you never know what crew are really capable of or when they're gonna miss because they do miss, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want you to, next question. You kind of know the drill with this one because I think I've asked you it the past 2 years. I want you to tell me the flashiest, coolest crew play you've ever pulled off.
Hmm. I don't know if it's so much as a play as a lock.
Hmm.
And it's something you can get very rarely versus smaller account teams. And it has to deal with the Pistolier and the dog. And you can get it to be this combo where if you have the dog within the Pistolier, an opponent can't shoot the Pistolier without the Pistolier shooting you first. And if that pistol, because the Pistolier has an interrupt action,
Hmm.
if the Pistolier does shoot you first, he's shooting with the 3/4 ceaseless, usually accurate one, um, and then a piercing one, lethal five, and stun shot.
Pretty
It's like
good.
7 keywords you can stack on him. Uh, so usually people don't want to have that happen to them. So they're like, okay, well, I'll charge the Pistolier. But then the dog just comes in and charges you instead. And then the Pistolier slips away and then shoots you with that profile I just mentioned anyway.
Amazing.
So it's one of these things where you're like, how do I get to the Pistolier?
It's a
And
man and
then
his
you
dog.
slowly realize you can't. Yeah.
I mean,
So
that's
it's
like,
this weird flashy lock with 7 keywords on it that you just can't do anything to.
I mean, that's like a Fallout 3 simulator right there. As you're just a guy with a cowboy hat and two guns and a dog, and you just cannot be dealt
Yeah.
with. I kind of love that.
It's pretty cool.
Um,
Yeah, at Worlds I managed to have that set up versus one of the Harlequin players. I think it was one of the Canadian players. And he just sat there for like 10 minutes trying to figure out what to do to the Pistolier. And ultimately he's just like, I think I just have to let the Pistolier shoot. I don't think there's any other choice.
yeah.
And then the Pistolier missed all of the shots, and it
Well,
didn't
there you go. That was a
matter.
Kroot moment right there. Certified Kroot moment.
Yeah, another Kroot moment. I got 4 ones, I think, and re-rolled into maybe a hit.
Yeah. Wow. All right. Well, we're on to the last question. Orion, and I cannot express how excited I am to ask you this question in particular because you are a chef. For those of you that do not know, Orion is
Mm.
he's a lover of food. So I'm asking everybody to tell me a favorite holiday. It can be a meal, a treat, a drink, but something that they love to have on the holidays in particular.
Hmm. So I would probably say it's not something that I'm always excited to eat it, but I'm usually required on Christmas Eve. My mom always has like a small get together, and it's always like a big appetizer party. And what I've been required to bring is fried deviled eggs with whiskey candied bacon. And
Okay.
usually, those are a specialty of mine where, you fry the egg whites, you fill it with the deviled egg filling, and you top it with like a whiskey coated bacon
Oh
that I
wow.
cook up. Oh, and they're
Sounds
so good.
amazing.
They're sweet, they're savory. Usually, like, I have to keep count on people because if not, they eat like 10 when I'm not
Yeah.
looking.
Oh wow.
Because like
That
deviled
sounds
eggs,
good.
I don't know what it is with deviled eggs. They go down so easy.
Yeah, I mean, you get the right stuff on deviled eggs, and it's just awesome. I've had deviled eggs with some really gross stuff on that I didn't like, but I've had deviled eggs with like something I like, and it's just like the best snack. um,
It's one of those things where like I can't eat that many hard-boiled eggs, but when you devil them, all of a sudden like a dozen
yeah,
is gone. I just don't know what happened, and I'm lying on the floor dead. Like,
yeah, yeah. All right, perfect. That's a really cool answer. I like the sound of that. Um, all right, Orion, thank you for joining us again for the third straight year. It's always a pleasure
my
to have you
pleasure.
on. Yeah. Everybody watching, if you're not subscribed, please subscribe. We are just like inching closer to 10K. I talk about it every episode. I'm like a broken record, but it's close. We're almost there. And tomorrow we're gonna have the 10th day of Kill Team, and we've got new exciting stuff to
Ooh.
talk about. It's almost Christmas. Everybody enjoy your night and take it easy.